Hey guys, this is Austin. You should probably click away from this video.
$6 grand?
Linus recently made a video on this, the AMD Athlon 3000G. It's a very impressive budget processor. However, he tested it in single channel memory mode, which with Ryzen has a huge impact to performance. Now, of course, the comments pointed this out, and I, in my superior intellect, would never ever make a mistake like that. I mean, clearly, I know what I'm talking about when it comes to Ryzen. I would never accidentally run something in single channel memory when it was supposed to be in dual or vice versa. I mean, clearly I know what I'm talking about. For real though, this is actually a very interesting processor. At $50, you're getting a pair of Zen cores as well as OK integrated graphics, and it's even overclockable, which of course begs the question that exactly no one has asked for. Exactly how far can we push it? Now, of course, there's the simple method. We could add dual channel memory, we could start to overclock it a little bit, but I have something a little bit more nefarious in mind. What happens when you pair a $50 CPU with a $1,200 graphics card? See, I told you this video was gonna be dumb. You didn't listen to me, did you? Now you're here, you're committed. The watch time is through the roof because you're stuck and you can't stop watching the video now. Now, obviously, no one should ever do this. It's a terrible idea to bottleneck a system this hard. But with this, we could very easily go from this $50 little tiny Athlon CPU to a full 16-core Ryzen 9, and it would just be a drop-in upgrade. So while yes, I could and probably should use a better cooler than the stock one that it comes with, realistically, even with trying to overclock this, we're not gonna be able to get that much more performance out of it. And realistically, where I think we can get more performance is in areas such as the memory. So we had some slight issues in that our X570 motherboard didn't actually support our very low-end Athlon 3000G processor, which technically it should have, but I guess no one's ever thought to do that because that's really dumb. So instead, we're using the good old A320M Gigabyte board, which is a grand total of like 50 bucks. With this and a fresh BIOS, we're all set up. I've got 16 gigs of RAM, just running at 2133 right now, so just very stock. And let's see what this Athlon can do before we throw some of the crazy stuff at it. Okay, so we have 1,312 as our baseline benchmark inside Firestrike. Now let's jump into Csgo and see if it'll actually work. So the thing is, Csgo is obviously a fairly old game that's pretty easy to run. So if I was going to just purely use the Athlon, that actually would be a good game to try. But we have a couple other titles that we can also, I'll say stress test with because it's not really fair. I don't think GTA 5 will run on this thing at all, actually. All right, so inside Csgo, 1080p high, should be pretty standard settings. I'm hopeful this is playable. I seem to recall with some of the earlier Athlons and the low-end Ryzen stuff, it's not that bad. This is fine. Oh, well, that's a big stutter. We're looking at 30 to 40 FPS. Oh, is this a shotgun? Did I just accidentally buy a shotgun? I did, didn't I? Okay. Well, all right. I'm willing to say that that is a almost playable 40 frames per second on high at 1080p. Shall we actually throw a graphics card in this and see what happens? Okay, so with our 2080 Ti installed, we should have significantly better performance. Now, by significantly better, I mean, it's certainly not going to be as good as if we had, say, I don't know, a not $50 CPU, but I have high hopes. We'll say high hopes for this. All right, so we have our driver installed, and if we pull it up here, you'll see that not only do we have our Athlon 3000G running at a whopping 3.5 gigahertz, but it's paired with 16 gigs of RAM, which for some reason it's not showing here. But importantly, we have our RTX 2080 Ti. So let's see exactly how well it can benchmark, how it can handle 3D Mark Firestrike. Can I just take a moment and point out that we are using a $50 CPU, very slow DDR4 memory, stock speeds, and a $50 motherboard with a $1,200 graphics card. Woo, 19, 18. That's where the CPU comes in. So while the other tests were graphics, this is purely CPU, and as you can see, we're still complete garbage here. But once you actually average it all out together, this actually should be okay. So for reference, our score with the Athlon by itself was 1,312. We're up to almost 12,000. So if you have a $50 CPU and you want to get 10 times the performance in 3D Mark, spend 24 times that price on a graphics card and you'll be just fine. Why don't we try playing some actual games this time? I'm actually kind of curious to see what we get with Csgo, because traditionally, while it's not hard to get a decent frame rate, to get higher FPS, you really do need a very powerful CPU. But because we have great graphics here, I'm just gonna crank everything all the way up because why not? Excuse me, am I at 1440p at 100 frames per second right now? I mean, yeah, 100 frames per second is not great with a 2080 Ti, but I mean, it's not bad. It's still running pretty smoothly. I will say, while I have very low expectations for this, you wouldn't really be able to tell that this is a $50 CPU. I mean, 100 frames per second at 1440p? Sure, the 2080 Ti could go a lot harder, you could get a lot more performance, but I expected this to be a pretty severe bottleneck. So for a game that's a little bit more demanding, we have GTA 5, which is running at 1440p with most settings set to high. Is that 60 frames per second? What? Wait, that's pretty much 60 frames per second. With a $50 CPU, we haven't even overclocked it. We haven't even started running the RAM at more than the base speed. And while, yes, a 2080 Ti should be capable of more than 50, 60 FPS at 1440p, but that is very playable. That is very, very playable. I am legitimately impressed. So next up we have F1 2019. Now I'm gonna try to push it as far as I can. So 2080 Ti is running at 1440p. All settings are pretty much set to ultra high. So let's give the benchmark mode a try. 60 FPS again, are you serious? What is going on? Why is this not bad? Okay, we go outside, we're down to 50. My mind is kind of blown right now that a $50 CPU is not terrible. I mean, it's not great, it's certainly not great, but 60 FPS is still not bad considering that we have everything set to ultra high. So I think what we're finding out here is that a $50 CPU, while not great, especially when you're running it in single channel memory and the integrated graphics, this actually wouldn't be so bad, especially considering that most AM4 motherboards are very easy to upgrade. So you could start out with the Athlon, and then as you get a little bit more money, you want a little bit more performance, you could upgrade to say a Ryzen 5 or Ryzen 7 or something. So I think the only thing we can do now is to overclock, because why not? Let's see what we can actually pull out of this, because it's running at stock speeds and the memory is actually quite slow. Oh no! I'm stupid! No! I forgot when I started making this video I was using the X570. It's a very high-end board. I can throw high-end memory and overclock. But I'm using a low-end board and I forgot I switched it out. Another day, another motherboard, and let's see how far we can push the 3000G. So I was able to push it to 4 gigahertz on all cores, it's on both cores. And I was also able to bump the memory up to 2666 megahertz, which is the rated maximum, and that was as high as I could get it stable without losing my overclock. So let's run through Firestrike again and see if this is better or not. So our overclock actually isn't too crazy. So we're somewhere in the neighborhood of 15% higher on the CPU and another 10-15% on the memory. So especially considering that a lot of this test is graphics bound, I don't expect it to be a huge difference. This is really the only place where we're going to see any kind of significant difference. And that's a bit better. I think before we were actually 17, 18 FPS. Now we're 21. So the number to beat is 11,963, and we've got 13,300? Are you serious? That's actually a pretty reasonable upgrade. So for context, Csgo before we were high 1440p and we were getting roughly 90 FPS. So let's see if we can average that out a little bit more. We're getting a real performance improvement here. Instead of sitting at 90 to 100 FPS, we're at 100 to 120. Which makes sense because this game is very much CPU bound when you get to those higher frame rates. So we went from 61 to 70 FPS in F1 just by overclocking the CPU and speeding up the memory. I am legitimately impressed. And again, in GTA 5, we're getting a solid 10 FPS boost just by overclocking. Now, the cool thing about the CPU is that while yes, for $50, it is not incredibly powerful, but it is a really easy upgrade platform. So if you want to build yourself your first gaming PC and you start out with the Athlon, you can build something for very cheap, and then as you get a little bit more money, you can add yourself a graphics card, maybe not quite the 2080 Ti, and then once you sort of hit the upper limits of that, you can easily swap it out with something like a Ryzen 3 or a Ryzen 5 or theoretically all the way up to Ryzen 9. Now yes, there are certainly cases where you might want to spend a little bit more money. For example, a Ryzen 3 3200G is not that much more and will give you significantly better performance with that full quad-core design. Especially if you're doing anything like streaming, you're definitely going to want more cores. But I have to say, I am very, very impressed with what we were able to pull off with the $50 CPU. I mean, this is a ridiculous setup. It shouldn't work, but it's actually not bad. I said it.